When Mercy Caldwell was stripped of everything, her clothes, her dignity, her very humanity, and placed on an auction block by her own family, she thought her life was over. But the mysterious rancher who bought her had plans that would either destroy her completely or set her free in ways she never imagined possible. But which path would he choose? The wooden platform creaked under Mercy's bare feet as angry voices shouted numbers around her. Cedar Falls had never seen anything like this before, a woman being sold like cattle in the town square on this cold October morning in 1862. Her brother-in-law Curtis stood beside the platform, his face red with excitement as men called out their bids. "She can cook, clean, and work harder than any mule," Curtis yelled to the crowd. His voice cracked with greed. Just 3 days ago, he had been family. Now he was selling her to pay off her dead husband's gambling debts. Mercy wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. The Nebraska wind cut through her thin underclothes like ice. She kept her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to look at the men who stared at her like she was a prize horse. Their ugly laughter made her stomach turn. "What am I bid for this fine woman?" Curtis continued. "She's young, strong, and knows how to follow orders." The crowd pressed closer. Mercy could smell their unwashed bodies and cheap whiskey. Some men leered at her with hungry eyes. Others looked uncomfortable but didn't speak up to stop what was happening. A few women in the crowd whispered behind their hands, their faces full of pity and shame. $20, shouted a fat man with missing teeth. 30, called another. Curtis rubbed his hands together. Each bid meant more money in his pocket. He didn't care that Mercy had helped nurse his own children when they were sick. He didn't care that she had been kind to his wife. All he saw were dollar signs. Mercy's heart pounded like a drum. Where would she end up? Who would buy her? The stories she had heard about what happened to women in her situation made her feel sick with fear. Some were worked to death. Others faced worse fates that people only whispered about in dark corners. Then something strange happened. A tall man in a worn cowboy hat stepped out from the back of the crowd. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking at her like she was property. His gray eyes held something different, something that looked almost like respect. $50, he said in a calm, clear voice. The crowd went quiet. It was more money than anyone expected to hear. Curtis's eyes went wide with surprise and greed. Mercy found herself staring at this mysterious stranger, wondering who he was and what he planned to do with her. The man stood perfectly still, his weathered hands resting at his sides. He wore simple ranch clothes, nothing fancy, but something about him made the other men step back slightly. There was a quiet strength about him that commanded attention without saying a word. But was he her salvation, or just another kind of nightmare waiting to begin? $100. The same mysterious voice cut through the shocked silence like a knife through butter. The crowd turned to stare at the tall stranger in disbelief. Even Curtis couldn't hide his amazement. His mouth hung open like a fish gasping for air. Mercy felt her knees go weak. $100 was more money than most people in Cedar Falls saw in a year. What kind of man had that much cash to spend on a person? And more importantly, what did he plan to do with her once he owned her? "Sold!" Curtis stammered, practically dancing with joy. He had expected maybe $20 at most. This windfall would pay Henry's debts and leave plenty left over for himself. The stranger walked toward the platform with steady steps. The crowd parted before him like he was some kind of important person. Up close, Mercy could see he was probably around 40 years old, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes the color of storm clouds. Work had made his hands rough and strong. Without saying a word, he took off his brown leather coat and held it out to her. The simple act shocked everyone watching, including Mercy herself. No one had shown her kindness in days. Her hands shook as she reached for the coat. "Name's Daniel Forrester, ma'am," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of town." Mercy wrapped the coat around herself, feeling human again for the first time since this nightmare began. The leather was warm from his body heat and smelled like honest work hay, horses, and fresh air. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You just bought me." Daniel's expression grew serious. "No, ma'am. I bought your freedom. What you choose to do with it is entirely up to you." The words hit Mercy like lightning. Freedom? She had almost forgotten what that word meant. For 3 years, she had been trapped in a marriage with a drunk who beat her regularly. Then Henry died, and Curtis had claimed ownership of her like she was a piece of furniture. "I can offer you honest work at my ranch," Daniel continued. "Room, board, and wages when I can manage them. My sister Catherine runs the household. She'll treat you fair and square." Mercy studied his face, looking for lies or hidden meanings, but his gray eyes held nothing but sincerity. Still, she had learned to be careful about trusting men and their promises. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help a stranger?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking out at the crowd that was slowly breaking up now that the show was over. "Let's just say, I know what it's like to lose everything you care about. Sometimes we all need a second chance." He helped her down from the platform with gentle hands, treating her like a lady instead of purchased goods. As they walked toward his wagon, Mercy caught sight of Curtis counting his money with greedy fingers. He didn't even look up to say goodbye. But what secrets was this Daniel Forrester hiding? And could Mercy really trust him with her life? The wagon wheels hit every bump and rock on the dusty trail, but Mercy barely felt them. Her mind was spinning like a tornado. What kind of man buys a woman just to give her a coat? What did he really want from her? Daniel Forrester sat beside her, holding the reins with steady hands. He hadn't said much since leaving town, just pointed out a hawk circling overhead and mentioned that rain might come by evening. Normal things. Like she was a normal person, instead of someone who'd just been sold like a cow. "There it is," he said, nodding toward a valley spread out below them. Mercy's breath caught in her throat. The ranch wasn't fancy, but it looked like something from a dream she'd forgotten she had. A log house sat near a creek that sparkled in the afternoon sun. Horses grazed in a fenced pasture. Chickens pecked around a red barn. Everything looked clean and cared for. But the biggest surprise came walking out of the house. "Daniel's back," called a woman with flour on her apron and a smile that reached her eyes. She was maybe 30 years old, with brown hair pulled back and the kind of face that looked like it laughed often. "This is my sister Catherine," Daniel said, helping Mercy down from the wagon. "Cat, meet Mrs. Caldwell." Catherine looked Mercy up and down, but not in the mean way Mercy was used to. More like a doctor checking for broken bones. "Lord have mercy, you're thin as a rail," Catherine said. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Mercy opened her mouth, then closed it. She couldn't remember. "That's what I thought. Come on, let's get some food in you." The kitchen smelled like bread and coffee and something wonderful cooking on the stove. Catherine sat Mercy at a wooden table worn smooth by years of use, then ladled beef stew into a blue bowl. "Eat up," Catherine said, "and don't you worry about anything else right now." The stew was the best thing Mercy had tasted in months, maybe years. As she ate, Catherine and Daniel talked about ordinary things. Fixing a fence, a cow that might be sick, whether they had enough hay for winter. Nobody mentioned the auction. Nobody asked questions she couldn't answer. Nobody treated her like she was broken or dangerous or less than human. After supper, Catherine showed Mercy to a small room at the back of the house. It had a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand with soap that smelled like lavender, and a window that looked out over the creek. "This was going to be the nursery," Catherine said quietly, smoothing the quilt. "But that was before Daniel's wife died, before everything changed." Mercy felt her stomach drop. "His wife? Fever took her and their baby boy 3 years ago. Daniel hasn't been the same since." Catherine's voice got softer. "Maybe that's why he helped you today. He knows what it's like when life tears everything away." That night, lying in the first real bed she'd had in years, Mercy stared at the ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Were they being kind because they pitied her? Did Daniel expect her to take his dead wife's place? And why did Catherine look sad whenever she thought no one was watching? Outside, an owl called across the darkness, and Mercy fell asleep to the sound of the creek running over stones. Mercy woke to the sound of horses. Too many horses for a normal morning. She pulled on the dress Catherine had given her and looked out the window. 5 men sat on horseback in the yard, and her blood turned to ice water. Curtis led the group, but the others were strangers with guns on their hips and mean looks in their eyes. Daniel walked out of the barn carrying a pitchfork, but Mercy could see the tension in his shoulders. Catherine appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, but her face had gone pale. "Well, well," Curtis called out, loud enough for the whole valley to hear. "If it isn't my dear sister-in-law, living high and mighty." Mercy's legs felt weak. but she forced herself to walk outside. Running would only make things worse. Curtis. She kept her voice steady, even though her heart was beating like a drum. What do you want? Curtis swung down from his horse with a grin that made her skin crawl. Funny thing, Mercy. Seems like Henry owed more money than we thought. A lot more. One of the strangers spat tobacco juice into the dirt. He had a scar running down his left cheek and eyes like chips of flint. Your husband borrowed from some serious people, lady. People who don't forget debts. The sheriff rode up behind them, looking uncomfortable. Tom Bradley had known Mercy since she was a girl, and he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Daniel, the sheriff said, I'm sorry about this, but Curtis has papers. Legal papers saying the debt follows the family line. That's not how the law works, Tom, Catherine said sharply, and you know it. The scarred man laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. Law's whatever we say it is out here, lady. Daniel stepped forward, still holding the pitchfork. Mrs. Caldwell is under my protection. She's not going anywhere. Your protection? Curtis's voice dripped poison. She's not your wife, Forrester. She's not even your hired help. She's nothing but trouble in a dress. Mercy felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, but crack open like an egg. And what came out wasn't fear. It was anger. White-hot, burning anger at being talked about like she wasn't even there. I have a voice, Curtis, she said, stepping between Daniel and the guns. And I can speak for myself. The scarred man's hand moved to his gun belt. This is taking too long. The woman comes with us, willing or not. Over my dead body, Daniel said quietly. That can be arranged, the gunman replied. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The only sound was wind rustling through the cottonwoods and horses stamping their feet. Mercy could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip into violence that would destroy everything good she'd found. Then she heard it, the distant sound of more horses coming fast down the trail. This is taking too long. The woman comes with us, willing or not. The scarred gunman's hand moved toward his gun like a snake ready to strike. Daniel stepped in front of Mercy, his voice steady as stone. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, the gunman said with a cold smile. The ranch yard went quiet as death. Even the chickens stopped pecking. Mercy could hear her own heart beating like thunder in her chest. She looked at Daniel's broad shoulders protecting her and felt something break open inside her heart. No one had ever stood up for her before. Not when Henry hit her. Not when the neighbors whispered. Not when her own family sold her like a cow at market. But this man, this stranger who barely knew her, was ready to die for her freedom. Enough! Mercy stepped around Daniel, placing herself between him and the guns. Her voice rang out clear and strong across the dusty ground. You want to know about debts? About what people owe? Curtis's face turned red as a beet. Now see here. I'm not done talking. Mercy's words cut through his protest like a knife through butter. Henry Caldwell owed me 3 years of my life. 3 years of nursing him, while he drank away our money. 3 years of covering bruises and making excuses for his fists. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Some of the townspeople who had gathered to watch began nodding their heads. He owed me the babies I lost, because of his kicks to my belly, Mercy continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. He owed me the dreams I buried every time he came home drunk and angry. Curtis's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't just, I owe nothing to dead men or their so-called debts, Mercy declared. I've paid my share in blood and tears and sleepless nights. If you want to collect something, go dig it up from Henry's grave. The scarred gunman took a step forward, his gun halfway out of its holster. That's when the sharp crack of a rifle split the air like lightning. Everyone's head snapped toward the sound. On the hill above the ranch stood old Pete Jameson from the general store, his hunting rifle pointed right at them. Behind him, spread out in a line, stood a dozen men from town. All of them had guns. Seems to me we've had enough excitement for one day, Pete called out, his voice carrying easy across the valley. Time for you boys to ride on out of here. The scarred gunman looked up at all those rifle barrels pointing down at him. Even he wasn't stupid enough to fight those odds. Curtis's face went from red to purple. This isn't over, Mercy. A woman alone has no rights in this world. You'll learn that truth soon enough. She's not alone, Daniel said quietly, but his words carried like they were shouted. Catherine stepped up beside her brother. Not by a long shot. Pete Jameson and his men started walking down the hill, their boots crunching on the dry grass. The sound was like music to Mercy's ears. Curtis jerked his horse's reins so hard the animal reared up. "Mount up," he barked at his men. "We're leaving, but this ain't finished. Not by half." As the riders galloped away in a cloud of dust, Mercy felt her knees go weak. All the fear she'd been holding inside came rushing out like water through a broken dam. Daniel caught her arm, steady and strong. "You did good," he said softly. "Real good." The kitchen felt warm and safe after the cold fear of the yard. Pete Jameson sat at the wooden table, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The other men from town filled every chair and leaned against every wall. "Curtis has been running his mouth all over Cedar Falls," Pete explained, taking a long sip, bragging about his big score, talking about how he plans to auction you off again and again until you learn to mind your place. Mercy's stomach twisted like a rope being pulled tight. "Again and again." "That's what he said," nodded Jim Crawford, the blacksmith. His massive arms were crossed over his chest, and his face looked like a thundercloud. "Didn't sit right with any of us decent folk." Old Doc Hansen spoke up from the corner where he stood. "We all remember Henry coming to town with you, Mercy. Remember seeing those bruises on your arms and face. We should have done something then, to our shame. But we're doing something now," Pete said firmly. "Curtis Caldwell and his hired guns aren't welcome in this valley anymore." Catherine poured more coffee and set a plate of cookies on the table. "You men are angels walking this earth," she said with feeling. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," said young Billy Martinez, barely 18 and eager to prove himself a man. "My ma always said you judge a town by how it treats its women and children." Mercy looked around at all these faces, men who barely knew her, who had risked their lives to stand with her. Her throat felt thick with emotion she couldn't name. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this for me?" Pete set down his coffee cup with a gentle clink. "Because it's right. Because a person's worth isn't decided at some auction block. Because this is supposed to be a place where people can start fresh, not where they get ground down by bullies. And because," added Doc Hansen quietly, "we've all got daughters or sisters or wives. What happens to you could happen to any of them if men like Curtis get their way." The room fell silent for a moment. Outside, the wind rattled the windows like fingers tapping for attention. "He'll be back," Mercy said finally. It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded from where he stood by the stove. "When he does, we'll be ready." "Will you, though?" The question came from Jim Crawford, and it made everyone turn to look at him. "I mean, we can't watch this place every hour of every day. We all got our own work, our own families." "Curtis is mean," Pete said slowly, "but he's not stupid. He won't come at you straight on again, not after today. He'll try something sneaky, something that can't be traced back to him." Fear crawled up Mercy's spine like a cold spider. "What do you mean?" "Fire," Doc Hansen said grimly. "Or maybe accidents that don't look like accidents. Curtis has money now, your money, and money can buy a lot of trouble in a place like this." Catherine moved to stand behind Mercy's chair, her hands warm and protective on Mercy's shoulders. "Then we'll have to be smarter than he is." "How?" Billy asked. Daniel turned from the stove, his gray eyes thoughtful. "We give him what he wants." Every head in the room snapped toward him. "What?" Catherine gasped. "Not really," Daniel said quickly. "But we make him think he's getting it. Set a trap he can't resist walking into." Mercy felt a spark of something dangerous light up in her chest. Something that felt like hope mixed with anger, a combination that could either save her or destroy everything she was building. "What kind of trap?" she asked. Daniel's smile was sharp as winter wind, the kind that uses his greed against him. Strange visitors came to the ranch on a cold morning when the world looked like it was made of glass. 3 women in dark dresses stepped down from a fancy wagon, their faces hidden by thick veils. Mercy watched from the kitchen window as Daniel walked out to meet them, his breath making little clouds in the freezing air. "Mrs. Forrester?" The tallest woman spoke in a voice that sounded like she was used to being listened to. "We need to speak with Mrs. Caldwell." Catherine grabbed Mercy's arm. "Don't go out there. Something feels wrong." But Mercy was already moving toward the door. She had learned that running from trouble only made it chase you harder. Outside, the 3 women stood like black crows against the white snow. "I'm Mercy Caldwell," she said, pulling her shawl tight. The tall woman lifted her veil. She was maybe 50 years old, with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. I'm Mrs. Victoria Sterling. These are my associates, Mrs. Hammond and Mrs. Price. Mercy had heard that name before. Victoria Sterling owned half the businesses in the territory. Rich women didn't visit poor ranches unless they wanted something. Curtis Caldwell came to see us. Mrs. Sterling continued, he's offered us a very interesting business deal. You see, we run a special kind of boarding house in Denver, for gentlemen who are willing to pay well for company. Daniel stepped closer to Mercy. Ma'am, I think you should leave now. Mrs. Sterling ignored him completely. Curtis has agreed to sell us his rights to Mrs. Caldwell for $500. That's more money than this little ranch will make in 2 years. Mercy felt her stomach drop like a stone down a well. I'm not for sale. Oh, my dear. Mrs. Sterling laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You were sold the moment you stepped on that auction block. Curtis just hadn't decided what to do with his purchase until now. The second woman, Mrs. Hammond, spoke up. She was younger, maybe 30, with blonde hair and sad eyes. The work isn't so bad once you get used to it, and you'll have a roof over your head, pretty dresses, good food. Food that comes with a price, Catherine said sharply from the porch. Mrs. Price, the third woman, had been quiet until now. She was the youngest of the three, barely older than Mercy herself. When she spoke, her voice shook a little. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Curtis has the law on his side. If you don't come willingly, he'll send men with guns. Mercy looked at Daniel, then at Catherine, then back at the three women. Something about Mrs. Price bothered her. The way she held her hands, the way she couldn't quite meet anyone's eyes. How long have you worked for Mrs. Sterling? Mercy asked her directly. Mrs. Price's face went white. That's not important. 2 years, Mrs. Sterling answered for her. She's been very successful. But Mercy was watching Mrs. Price's face, and she saw the truth written there like words on a page. This wasn't a successful businesswoman. This was a prisoner, just like Mercy had been. What happens if someone wants to leave your boarding house? Mercy asked quietly. Mrs. Sterling's smile got colder. Why would anyone want to leave? We provide everything a woman could need. That's not an answer. For the first time, Mrs. Sterling looked annoyed. The girls signed contracts, legal contracts. Breaking a contract has consequences. Daniel had heard enough. Get off my land. This isn't your decision to make, Mr. Forrester, Mrs. Sterling said. The woman belongs to Curtis Caldwell, and Curtis Caldwell has made his choice. Mercy felt something break open inside her chest, like ice cracking on the creek in spring. She had run from one kind of prison only to find another one waiting. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't alone. Mrs. Price, she said, her voice carrying across the cold air. What's your real name? The young woman's eyes filled with tears. I can't. Your real name, Mercy said again, gentler this time. Elizabeth, she whispered. Elizabeth Morrison. Mrs. Sterling's face went dark with anger. That's enough. We're leaving. But we'll be back tomorrow with Curtis and the sheriff. You can come easy, or you can come hard. Your choice. As the three women climbed back into their wagon, Mercy caught Elizabeth's eye one more time. In that look, she saw everything she needed to know. Curtis wasn't just trying to get rid of her. He was trying to destroy her in a way that would warn every other woman in the territory what happened when you tried to stand up for yourself. But he had made one big mistake. He had shown her exactly how far he was willing to go. And now she knew how far she was willing to go too. Thunder rolled across the plains like God's own drumbeat as the whole town gathered in Cedar Falls' main street. Word had spread faster than wildfire that Mercy Caldwell was going to face Curtis once and for all, and nobody wanted to miss it. Rain threatened in the dark clouds above, but not a single person headed for cover. Mercy stood in the center of it all, wearing her best dress and holding her head high. In her hands, she clutched a leather folder that Daniel had helped her prepare the night before. Curtis rode up with Sheriff Bradley and Mrs. Sterling's fancy wagon right behind him, just like she knew he would. Well, well, Curtis called out loud enough for everyone to hear. Look who finally decided to be smart. Ready to come along quietly? I'm ready for something, Mercy said. Her voice wasn't loud, but somehow everyone heard every word. I'm ready to tell this whole town the truth about Curtis Caldwell." Curtis's smile faded a little. "Now what are you babbling about?" Mercy opened her leather folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are letters, Curtis. Letters that Henry wrote to his friend in Kansas. Letters where he talked about how you used to beat him when you were children. How you always took his food, his toys, anything that made him happy." The crowd started murmuring. Curtis's face went red. "Those are lies. And this," Mercy continued, pulling out another paper, "is a record from the bank in Omaha. It shows that you've been stealing money from Henry's account for 3 years, even before he died." Mrs. Sterling stepped down from her wagon, looking angry. "This is all very interesting, but it doesn't change anything. Curtis owns this woman, and I've paid good money for her." "Actually," said a new voice from the back of the crowd, "nobody owns anybody." Everyone turned to see a man in a fine black suit walking toward them. He was maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and the kind of confidence that came from knowing the law better than anyone else. "I'm Judge William Morrison, from the Territorial Court in Omaha," the man announced, "and I've been looking into some very interesting reports about illegal slave trading in this area." Curtis looked like he was going to be sick. "Slave trading? But she's white. And slavery's been illegal since 1863. "Selling a human being is selling a human being," Judge Morrison said calmly. "Color doesn't matter. And forcing women into prostitution is a crime in every territory of these United States." Mrs. Sterling tried to get back in her wagon, but 2 men who had been hiding in the crowd stepped forward. They wore badges that said, "U.S. Marshal." "Victoria Sterling," one of them announced, "you're under arrest for human trafficking and running a criminal organization." Everything happened fast after that. Mrs. Sterling started screaming about her rights, while the marshals put handcuffs on her. Curtis tried to run, but Pete Jameson stuck out his foot and sent him sprawling in the mud. Even Elizabeth, the sad young woman from the day before, was there. But now she was helping the marshals instead of working for Mrs. Sterling. "Elizabeth came to us 3 days ago," Judge Morrison explained to Mercy. "She told us everything about Mrs. Sterling's operation and how Curtis was planning to sell you. That's when we decided to set this trap." Sheriff Bradley looked embarrassed. "I didn't know, Your Honor. Curtis showed me papers that looked real." "The papers were fake," the judge said. "And even if they were real, you can't sell a person to pay off someone else's debts. The law doesn't work that way." As the marshals loaded Curtis and Mrs. Sterling into a prisoner wagon, Mercy felt something strange happen inside her chest. For months, she had been afraid. Afraid of Curtis. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of not being strong enough to take care of herself. But standing there, in the middle of town, with all these people who had chosen to help her, the fear just disappeared. "What happens now?" she asked Judge Morrison. "Now you're free," he said simply. "Completely free. Curtis can't touch you, Mrs. Sterling can't touch you, and nobody else can either. You belong to yourself, Mrs. Caldwell. Nobody else." Daniel stepped up beside her, smiling wider than she had ever seen him smile. "So what do you want to do with your freedom?" Mercy looked around at all the faces watching her. Some she knew, some she didn't, but all of them had stood up for her when it mattered. She thought about the ranch, about the work that needed doing, about the spring planting that was only a few months away. "I want to go home," she said. "I want to help you rebuild that barn. I want to plant vegetables and mend clothes and learn how to be happy." "And if someone else tries to hurt you?" Catherine asked. Mercy smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached all the way to her eyes. "Then, they'll have to deal with all of us." As the crowd started to break up and people headed for their homes, the first drops of rain began to fall. But nobody minded getting wet. They had all been part of something important today. They had all helped prove that sometimes, when good people stand together, they can beat the bullies. Mercy rode back to the ranch, sitting between Daniel and Catherine in their wagon, watching the storm clouds roll away to reveal clear blue sky. She was 24 years old, and for the first time in her life, tomorrow belonged to her. That was worth more than all the money in the world.